Lakeland Public Television's Common Ground is brought to you by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund.
What I'm going to show you today is how to do a paper lamination, which this is an example of paper lamination where I have a sheer polyester fabric and I have fastened newspaper to one side of it. It's not the whole newspaper, it's just a very thin layer of the surface. I like layering the pieces so that you can see through them and get a little bit more depth. I've also worked with laminations that end up being a complete lamination, which I can then cut up and adhere to some other fabric that I've hand dyed or done other processes on. I start doing the lamination by taking 1/8 from the newspaper. And I'm going to iron these. It seems kind of funny to be ironing newspaper, but I want to get these creases out. Now I've taken a paintbrush, a cheap paintbrush, and I mangle it by giving it a really bad haircut. Now I have taken some regular acrylic paint and I've mixed it with a little bit of matte medium and some water to thin it out a bit. I'm going to do some dry brushing onto my newspaper. I want to get the extra paint off so it's not going to be a big blob. But I'm just making these black marks on my paper, and these are representing the black marks that you see on the bark of a birch tree. I then take a sheer fabric. This is a very sheer polyester organza, and I'm going to lay that on top and start pinning it in place. Now I have all of my pins in place and I'm ready for the next step. So now I have this large piece that I can use as a stencil, and I'm going to pin that in place. I don't need to pin it quite as much as I pinned when I was pinning the fabric down. This stencil is going to act as my silk screen. So what I'm going to do is pour matte medium along the bottom here. If I were using a wooden silk screen, I would have a little area down at the bottom where I could put the matte medium, but here I'm just going to spread it. I have an area that doesn't have any design in it. And then I'm going to start scraping the medium up toward the other end of the fabric. Okay, this has the matte medium in it. I don't want it to dry in there, so I'm going to put it in some water right away. Another pin. Now I'm going to unpin this. But what I need to do now is heat set this. So I'm going to take some kitchen parchment, and I need to iron this piece. I would say probably 15 minutes to make sure that it's heat set. The next step is to get the paper off. To get the paper off, I'm going to wad it up and put it in a bucket of water. And that will need to soak for about 10 minutes. Now this has been soaking, and the paper is starting to loosen. So I'm going to lay this down on top of the plastic and start removing the paper. I will continue scrubbing and rinsing until I've gotten all of that first layer of paper off, and I just have the part that was right next to the sheer that's actually kind of glued on to my sheer fabric. My final step in the nice months is to take this out to my clothesline and spray it with a hose to get all of these little pieces of paper removed from it. But you can see how you're starting to see the birch trees. Lamination has dried. I want to put some grass idea down at the bottom. So I'm going to lay this out. I'm going to lay this out and put some grass color down at the bottom. For my grass color, I went out and took pictures of grass, and then had color copies made of this on inexpensive paper. I'm going to tear off the white edges. I put it face down so that my edges don't end up having the white on them, like this piece does. And I find having a straight edge to pull against, as long as I'm not going for an irregular edge, works very well. So this is a photograph of some grasses that I had took, and then I worked on it in Photoshop to isolate areas and end up making a black and white, and then I took it down and had a copy made of it with the toner. And then I ran it through the machine, and this is now a stencil, which is called a thermofax stencil. So I'm going to put this down on top and then use this tool and spread that across. Okay, here's the piece after the grass paper has been scrubbed away. So you have a hint of green down at the bottom that gives you the idea that that's the ground. Next, I want to add some fine twigs to it. Now this looks very dark right now because you're not only seeing what's on the sheer fabric, you're seeing what's underneath. Now this area I want to be a little bit thinner, so I'm just going to do it delicately that way to get finer branches down here. So this has created my twigs for the upper branches of my birch trees. After this black dries, I'm going to add some more color to the top. I'm going for summer, so I'm going to be using some brighter greens. This is kind of my medium green, which is going to be the base color. And I'll use this regular screen, silk screen squeegee. So this is starting to give the hint of the leaves in the tree. Next, I'm going to take a sponge, a sea sponge, because it'll give me nice texture. I'm going to use the same color and just start bouncing it around. Now you start to see more individual leaves with this texture. But I'm still using my base green. Now there are going to be areas where the sunlight is hitting the leaves, so I'm going to go to a lighter green and another sponge. Got to find an area of the sponge that doesn't have great big blobs on it. And I'm going to be adding a little bit of the lighter green for where the sunlight is starting to hit the leaves. I can let this dry now. I would probably iron it again to keep it all nice and flat. Then I would use my soldering iron and a straight edge. I have a piece of glass that I lay on my table, an old storm window. I lay my piece on top of it, use a metal straight edge, and heat up my soldering iron and cut off the edges and trim it up the right size. Okay, so this is how I make my birch trees. I think the most difficult part of this process that I've had to learn is patience. Things take time. You need to let things dry. Sometimes that's hard to do. You want to get back to it right away, and then you end up smearing pieces.
If you enjoyed this segment of Lakeland Public Television's Common Ground, consider making a contribution at lptv.org. If you have segment ideas pertaining to North Central Minnesota, contact us at legacy@lptv.org. Common Ground is funded by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund by the vote of the people on November 4th, 2008.